You looked in the mirror this morning, and for just a second something felt off, not the face itself. The face was fine, it was something behind the face. A quiet sense that time kept moving while you were busy living, and now you're standing here, wondering if you're already behind in a race you didn't know you were running. If that feeling has arrived even once, even faintly, then you already know what this is about. Not wrinkles, not gray hair, not the body slowing down. It's that deeper question nobody says out loud. Am I too late? Stay with me. Because what Buddhism figured out about this question, thousands of years before anyone called it aging anxiety, might be the only answer that actually holds. 1. You will be forgotten faster than you think, and there is something profound waiting inside that truth. This is the one nobody wants to say plainly, so let's say it plainly. The job that took decades to build, the colleagues who knew your name, the meetings, the accomplishments, the particular way you solved a certain problem no one else could, these things will pass from memory. Sooner than feels fair, sooner than the effort seems to deserve. Your children will be busy, not because they don't love you, but because life moves and they are inside it the way you once were. Your friends will have their own fading. The world will turn its attention toward what is new. And one day, someone will try to remember your last name and find they can't quite reach it. This sounds like grief, and at first it is. I want to stay here for a moment, not to rush past it toward comfort, but to feel what this actually is when it is held still. There is a kind of loneliness in this truth. A particular kind, not the loneliness of being alone in a room, but the loneliness of beginning to sense that the self we've built so carefully is not as solid as it felt. The Buddha called this anatta, no permanent fixed self. He wasn't being cruel. He was pointing at something that, once you see it directly, doesn't terrify the way you expected. There is a story. An old monk lived in a mountain temple, high up, where the mornings came in cold and the mist sat on the valley until nearly noon. He had lived there long enough that the younger monks couldn't imagine the place without him. A disciple came to him one day, sat beside him near the stone wall overlooking the river. He said quietly, "Does it trouble you, master, that when you are gone, your name may not be spoken for long?" The old monk didn't answer immediately. He watched the river. The water moved. A branch passed through. A bird called once from somewhere in the pine trees. Then he said, "Where is the water that was here when you woke this morning?" The disciple looked at the river. "It has flowed on," he said, "and yet," the monk replied, "and yet the river is still here." The monk nodded slowly, not because that ended the thought, but because the thought had gone as far as words could carry it. The river does not mourn the water that has passed through. It does not store it, mark it, build a monument to it. The water flows. The river remains, and downstream something drinks. This is what the Buddha meant, not that your life doesn't matter, but that the form mattering takes is not the form the ego imagines. You will not be remembered by name, but the kindness you offered a stranger in a difficult year, that moved through her, into the way she treated her daughter, into the way that daughter one day held a door open for someone who needed it. You will not trace that line. No one will trace that line, but the line exists. The river does not know where its water goes. It flows anyway. So what remains for you to do? Only this: to be present in the giving of it, to let the water flow without the fist clenched around it. Not your name, not the record, just the current, moving through everything it touches, unnamed. Alive, real, too. Your body will change in ways you didn't ask for, and it deserves something other than your resentment. There was a time when you didn't think about your knees. They just worked. You moved and the body followed, and that was the whole story. Now the story has more chapters, a certain heaviness when you rise from a chair, a sound the joints make on cold mornings, a tiredness that arrives before the day is finished and stays past when you expected it to leave. This can feel like betrayal. The body you trusted, the one that showed up for decades without asking to be thanked, it is doing something different now. Something slower. Something that asks you to notice it. But perhaps that is precisely the point. The Buddha spoke of the body not as something to be transcended, but as something to be known, to be met with attention, not war. There is a parable about an aging monk. He had spent years carrying water from the river to the temple, heavy clay jugs on a wooden yoke across his shoulders. His body had known that weight so long it had shaped itself around the task. But one season, his arms began to tremble under the load. He spilled water on the path. He had to rest where he had never rested before. He came to his teacher in the evening, frustrated in the quiet way that old frustration moves not loudly but heavily. "Master," he said, "my body no longer obeys me." The teacher handed him an old pot. One side had a long, slow crack in it. When it held water, a thin stream escaped along the crack all the way back from the river. The monk knew this pot. He had carried it himself. The teacher said, "Tell me what that crack has done." The monk said, "It leaks. It loses water on every trip." The teacher said, "And the path beside it?" The monk went quiet, because he knew the path beside it. On the side of the cracked pot, the grass grew greener. Wildflowers had seeded themselves there over the years, along the thin line of lost water. Small, persistent, quietly bright. The crack was not the failure. The crack was where something else happened. Your body is not failing you. It is asking to be accompanied differently. Move with it, not against it. Not with the impatience of someone waiting for it to return to what it was, but with the attention of someone who is learning the shape of what it is now. When it needs rest, give it rest. Not as defeat, as care. When it moves slowly, let it move slowly. Notice what you see when you are no longer moving fast enough to miss it. There is a quality of attention that only becomes possible when the body slows down enough to require it. The exact color of the late afternoon light. The sound of someone's breathing in the next room. The weight of a cup of tea held in both hands. These are not consolations. They are what was always there, waiting to be noticed by a person with enough stillness to notice them. Your body has carried you faithfully. Every scar is a record of something survived. Every slowing is an invitation to a different kind of presence. Befriend it, thank it. Walk with it gently, the way you would walk beside anyone who has traveled a long road with you and is beginning to show the journey. 3. People will leave your life. And the love that passed through them does not leave with them. There is a particular silence that comes when a person you expected to stay is no longer calling. You notice it not all at once but in small accumulations. The Friday that passes without the usual message. The holiday where the table has fewer chairs. The moment you reach for the phone to tell someone something small and remember mid-reach that they are not there to receive it. People leave for different reasons. Some drift, some choose. Some are taken, and some simply move into their own lives in ways that no longer have room for yours. It is easy to take this personally, to press it against yourself like an accusation. But Buddhism teaches something quieter. Relationships are not possessions. They are not rewards for goodness or evidence of worth. They are conditions arising two lives, briefly or deeply overlapping, and then, as all conditions do, changing form. There is a parable about a young monk who kept a small stone in his pocket given to him by a friend. He carried it for years, long after the friend had moved away, long after they had stopped writing. One day his teacher noticed the stone worn smooth from handling. "Who gave you that?" the teacher asked. "Someone who is gone," the monk said. "Do you carry it so he will not go?" The monk turned the stone over in his hand. He had never asked himself this. "You may keep the stone," the teacher said, "but know that the love it represents does not live inside it. It lives in the way you treat the next person who needs what your friend once gave to you. Grief and love are not opposites. They are the same river seen from two different banks. What you mourn is evidence of what was real. The depth of the missing is proportional to the depth of the having. And so there is something in the ache worth tending, not toward the ache itself, but toward the gratitude beneath it, the recognition that something of value passed through your life. The love did not leave with the person. It stayed, woven into the way you speak, the way you listen, the warmth you carry into rooms without knowing you carry it. You were changed by it. And that changing is still moving through the world in everything you touch. So let what has changed form change form, without grasping, without accusation. Stay open to what is still arriving. A neighbor's small gesture, a grandchild's attention, a stranger who stays a moment longer than they needed to. The heart does not have a fixed capacity. It grows around loss if we allow it. And what grows there can hold more than what was there before. 4. The face in the mirror is not the enemy. It is a record, and records have their own beauty. She came to the teacher looking at the floor, an older woman with the particular posture of someone who has decided to apologize before they've said a word. "Master," she said, "I look in the mirror now and I do not know the face I find there. My skin has softened. My hair has gone silver. I used to know my own reflection. Now it is a stranger. I feel invisible." The teacher said nothing at first. He walked her into the garden. It was late spring. A cherry tree was in full bloom at the garden's edge, extravagant, pink, impossible, the kind of beauty that makes people stop mid-step. He said, "Tell me what you see." She said, "Beauty." They stood there a moment longer. The petals moved slightly. A few fell. Then he led her to the far end of the path, where a pine tree stood that was very old. Its bark was deeply ridged, dark in the creases. Its branches reached and twisted with decades of growing. It had been shaped by wind, by weight, by time. It was not the cherry tree. It was something else entirely, he said, and here she was quiet. She looked at it properly, not glancing, looking. She said slowly, "There is something in it." Something that took a long time to become itself. The teacher said, "A child sees the blossom and is moved." But it is only with time that we learn to see the pine and understand that its beauty is a different thing, deeper rooted, slower made, and harder to find unless you have learned to look. The woman was quiet because she understood. She had been looking at her reflection through the eyes of someone who still wanted to see the blossom, but she had become the pine. This is not a small thing. The world sells youth as though it is the only currency of beauty, as though the face that carries decades of living is somehow less than the face that has not yet begun. But what lives in an older face is not erasable. It is not the absence of something. It is the presence of everything that has happened, sorrow endured, love given, difficulty survived. Moments of extraordinary, ordinary life, accumulated and compressed into the particular lines of this particular face. Yours, the next time you stand at the mirror, really stand at it without trying to fix what you find. See if you can simply look. Not evaluate, not assess, just look. The light on the skin, the exact color of the eyes, the way the face at rest holds the shape of all the expressions it has made. What is actually there when you let it be only what it is? No amount of correcting will give you back what was, and no amount of mourning will show you what is actually present. What is actually present is a life, worn, specific, yours. And that is not something to hide. 5. You will lose people you love, and love does not obey that loss. There was a woman, history has kept her name, Kisa Gautami. She had a young son and he died. And in the way of a grief that has not yet found its shape, she carried him through the village, from house to house, looking for something, a medicine, a reversal, a waking up from this. Someone directed her to the Buddha. He looked at her. He did not offer a teaching. He did not offer comfort in the way we expect comfort, the hand on the arm, the reassuring word. He said, "Go to every house in the village. Find me a handful of mustard seeds from a home that has never known death. Bring those seeds here and I will help you. She went. She knocked on the first door. And before she could finish asking, the family began to speak of their own losses. A mother, a brother, a child. She went to the second door, and the third, and the 10th, and the 30th. Every house had held grief. Every family had sat with what she was sitting with. Every threshold had been crossed by loss. By the time she had walked the whole village, she had not found what he asked for, but she had found something else. She returned to the Buddha, without the seeds, her hands empty. Her arms no longer holding her son. Because somewhere in the walking, in the listening, in the faces of strangers who opened their doors and allowed her into the middle of their own unfinished sorrow, she had understood. This is not only mine. This is not a mistake. This is not a failure of love to have allowed love to end. This is what life is. This is what it has always been. Grief is the thread that runs through everything, not as punishment, as connection. Every person who has ever loved has also lost, and in that you are not alone. You have never been alone. Even in the most solitary room of grief, there are millions of rooms like it, where someone else is sitting with what cannot be fixed and breathing anyway. The people you have lost did not take their love with them when they left. That love is still somewhere. It is in the way you listen when someone is sad. It is in the meal you make with care. It is in the joke you tell that comes from something they once taught you. They are in you, not as memory only, as living, moving influence. As the particular person you have become because of everything they brought to you. You don't move on from love like that. You move forward, carrying it, letting it change shape without insisting it return to the form it had. And when the grief arrives, not the first time, but the 10th, the 100th, the way grief does when it comes back wearing ordinary clothes on an ordinary Tuesday, because something small reminded you, let it come. Sit with it the way Kisa Gautami sat in front of the Buddha, hands empty, understanding something new. The love did not go. It is still moving through you, through every good thing you do, through every moment you choose to stay present with someone who needs presence. As long as you keep offering that, they are with you, not as ghosts, not as fiction, as the quiet force that made you who you are. Here is what I want to leave with you, not a conclusion, because nothing here concludes. Aging is not a closing. It is not something happening to you like an attack you must repel. It is life in full motion, the river still moving, the pine still growing, the cracked pot still walking the path. What the Buddha offered was not escape from this. He offered a quality of seeing, an attention without flinching, without layering over what is there with what we wish were there instead. Just this morning, just this face, just this body carrying you still, just this love still present, still moving. When you stop fighting what is true, something unusual becomes possible. Not happiness exactly, not the relief of the problem being solved, something quieter, a settling, the sense that what is here is enough to be with. That the present moment, this one, flawed and tired and real, does not need to be different in order to be inhabited fully. That is what these 5 truths are pointing toward. Not a better version of aging, not aging made comfortable through clever reframing, but a direct meeting with what is, the wrinkles, the absence, the slowing, the love that outlasts the body. All of it held in plain attention, all of it allowed to be exactly what it is. And in that allowing, something releases, not because the difficulty disappears, but because the war with it does. One small thing you can do right now today. The next time something about your aging body or your changed face or your quieter life produces a flicker of grief or resistance, don't immediately move away from it. Don't reach for the phone. Don't fill the room with sound. Just pause for one full breath. Let the feeling be in the room with you. Name it quietly if that helps. This is grief. Or this is resistance. Or simply, this is here. And then feel the body, the feet on the floor, the air coming in, The small, persistent fact that you are still here, still breathing, still present. That is not a trick. That is not meditation sold as medicine. That is what presence actually is, the return to what is happening rather than the story about what is happening. One breath. One moment of not fleeing. That is enough. That is everything. Aging is not the closing of a book. It is the moment you finally stop skimming and begin to read. Sometimes one part of this stays, even after everything else has settled. I'll see you in the next one.